Good morning. Today we will be discussing The Plague by Albert Camus. Today I will be sharing with you my view of this novel and also sharing some of my favorite passages in this book. I recently finished this book called The Plague, or in French, en français, it is called La Peste. I first tried to read this book en français, but failed miserably, so I decided to take it up in English. Maybe I'll read it in French one day. But to start off, it's narrated by the doctor of the book, who is the main character, although one does not know that he is the narrator until the very end of the book, when the doctor, the good doctor, reveals, his name is Dr. Bernard Rieux, R-I-E-U-X. He reveals that he was, in fact, the narrator and wrote the book. Now I'm going to read some passages, and I hope you will follow along. I'm reading, this is the Modern Library edition. It's a very nice one by Albert Camus. This is from the first part of the book. This is somebody talking with Rieux. This is somebody's talking with a doctor. I believe this is Cotard. This is in the apartment building towards the beginning of the novel. Those rats died of plague, was his conclusion, or of something extremely like it, and they've loosed on the town tens of thousands of fleas, which will spread the infection in geometrical progression unless it's checked in time. Rieux said nothing. About this time the weather appeared set fair, and the sun had drawn up the last puddles left by the recent rain. There was a serene blue sky flooded with golden light each morning, with sometimes a drone of planes in the rising heat. All seemed well with the world, and yet within 4 days the fever had made 4 startling strides. 16 deaths, 24, 28, and 32. On the 4th day, the opening of the auxiliary hospital in the premises of a primary school was officially announced. The local population, who so far had made a point of making their anxiety by facetious comments, now seemed tongue-tied and went their ways with gloomy faces. Rieux decided to ring up the prefect. So, in this passage, you can see the beginning of the plague. It has commenced with the dying of the rats. They're dying in plentiful numbers all over the city, and at first nobody seems to know why. It's sort of, they just turn up at the top of the staircase, but Rieux is on the case, and soon enough people start dying. This is from later. That was an exception. For most people it was obvious that the separation must last until the end of the epidemic, and for every one of us the ruling emotion of his life, which he had imagined he knew through and through, the people of Oran, that's the city in which the book takes place, where the plague happens, has been said, have simple passions, took on a new aspect. Husbands have had complete faith in their wives, found to their surprise that they were jealous, and lovers had the same experience. Men who had pictured themselves as Don Juans became models of fidelity. Sons who had lived beside their mothers, hardly giving them a glance, fell to picturing with poignant regret each wrinkle in the absent face that memory cast upon the screen. This drastic, clean-cut deprivation and our complete ignorance of what the future held in store had taken us unawares. We were unable to react against the mute appeal of presences, still so near and already so far, which haunted us day long. In fact, our suffering was twofold, our own to start with, and then the imagined suffering of the absent one, son, mother, wife, or mistress. And then it goes on to talk about the townsfolk more in depth. It says on the next page, in short, we returned to our prison house. We had nothing left us but the past, and even if some were tempted to live in the future, they had speedily to abandon the idea. Anyhow, as soon as we could be, once they felt the wounds that the imagination inflicts on those who yield themselves to it. I'll just pause briefly to say that I am recording this from my home in Wolcott, Vermont. This is a fireside chat, as it were. This is from later, page 90 in the Modern Library edition. A wet wind was sweeping up the nave, making the candle flames bend and flicker. This is from the church of Father Panilu, who's another character in the book, who befriends the doctor. The pungency of burning wax, coughs, a stifled sneeze rose toward Father Panilu, who, reverting to his exordium with a subtlety that was much appreciated, went on in a calm, almost matter-of-fact voice. Quote, "Many of you are wondering, I know, what I am leading up to. I wish to lead you to the truth and teach you to rejoice, yes, rejoice, in spite of all that I have been telling you. For the time is past when a helping hand or mere words of good advice could set you on the right path. Today, the truth is a command. It is a red spear sternly pointing to the narrow path, the one way of salvation. And thus, my brothers, at last it is revealed to you the divine compassion which has ordained good and evil in everything, wrath and pity, the plague, and your salvation. This same pestilence which is slaying you works for your good and points your path. Many centuries ago, the Christians of Abyssinia saw in the plague a sure and God-sent means of winning eternal life. Those who were not yet stricken wrapped around them sheets in which men had died of plague, so as to make sure of their death. I grant you such a frenzied quest of salvation was not to be commended. It shows an overhaste, indeed a presumptuousness, which we can but deplore. No man should seek to force God's hand or to hurry on the appointed hour, and from a practice that aims at speeding up the order of events which God has ordained unalterably from all time, it is but a step to heresy. Yet we can learn a salutary lesson from the zeal, excessive though it was, of those Abyssinian Christians. Much of it is alien to our more enlightened spirits, and yet it gives us a glimpse of that radiant, eternal light which glows, a small still flame in the dark core of human suffering. And this light, too, illuminates the shadowed paths that lead toward deliverance. It reveals the will of God in action, unfailingly transforming evil into good, and once again today it is leading us through the dark valley of fears and groans towards the holy silence, the wellspring of all life. This, my friends, is a vast consolation I would hold out to you, so that when you leave this house of God, you will carry away with you not only words of wrath, but a message, too, of comfort from your hearts." And then it goes on in the description. He hoped against hope that despite all the horrors of these dark days, despite the groans of men and women in agony, our fellow citizens would offer up to heaven that one prayer which is truly Christian, a prayer of love, and God would see to the rest. You can see that in this book there's this all-prevailing sense that love is what should guide man in his quest for meaning in life. This book is an existential classic. It is a work of absurdism. However, in the absurd, some can find what is truly meaningful in life, and that the doctor is arguing in the plague is love. Isn't that it, the gulf between Panilu and you? I doubt it. Panilu is a man of learning, a scholar. He hasn't come in contact with death. That's why he can speak with such assurance of the truth, with a capital T. But every country priest who visits his parishioners and has heard a man gasping for breath on his deathbed thinks as I do. He tried to relieve human suffering before trying to point out its excellence. Ryu stood up. His face was now in shadow. "Let's drop the subject," he said, "as you won't answer." Teru remained seated in his chair. He was smiling again. "Suppose I answer with a question." The doctor now smiled too. "You like being mysterious, don't you?" "Yes, fire away." "My question's this," said Teru. "Why do you yourself show such devotion, considering you don't believe in God? I suspect your answer may help me to mine." His face still in shadow, Ryu, the doctor, said that he'd already answered, that if he believed in an all-powerful God, he would cease curing the sick and leave that to him, but no one in the world believed in a God of that sort. No, not even Panilu, who believed that he believed in such a God. And this was proved by the fact that no one ever threw himself on Providence completely. Anyhow, in this respect, Ryu believed himself to be on the right road, and fighting against creation as he found it. "Ah," Teru remarked. "So that's the idea you have of your profession." "More or less." The doctor came back into the light. Teru made a faint whistling noise with his lips, and the doctor gazed at him. You see, Ryu is an unbeliever. However, throughout the book, he comes around to, well, having some sort of more clear notion of what is important in life. By being a doctor, he cures people, and that is his purpose in life. Yet he does not believe in God. However, he will come to see, as I say, what is most important, which is that, and as at the end of the book, he has an epiphany, and he sees that that those who were had a significant other that was strong, a strong relationship, and those people had love, and then later after the plague, those who had a falling out were not back together. Those whose relationships were not strong, those relationships that had love in them were the strong ones, and they were able to be happy at the end of the book. I'll share with you this passage from page 122. Many fledgling moralists in those days were going about our town proclaiming there was nothing to be done about it and we should bow to the inevitable, and Teru Ryu and their friends might give one answer or another, but its conclusion was always the same, their certitude that a fight must be put up in this way or that, and there must be no bowing down. The essential thing was to save the greatest possible number of persons from dying and being doomed to an unending separation. To do this, there was only one resource, to fight the plague. There was nothing admirable about this attitude, it was merely logical. So you can see there's a logic that's guiding Ryu. He's trying to save as many people as possible. You could even say that's Marxian, the greatest good for the greatest number of people enters into this book. I'm not sure Marx's dates, but then we get to part 3. And in part 3, the plague is continuing, and it is not abating as yet. People are still infected. There's a sort of hush among the town, in the town itself, and people are trying to carry on with their lives, and yet there is the plague that is foremost, that is ever present. The town is shut off from the rest of the world, and there is not too much that can be done except for the doctor, which he goes along his normal path trying to cure, if not cure, then to abate the suffering of the people. And I will pause here and say, as I said, that it's a very good book, and I will continue with part 3 at another time. Thank you for listening.